Dr. Rahat, it's a pleasure to have you in our program. Thank you for taking the time for this conversation with me. So let's start with the basics. Does Israel have a constitution?
The answer is yes and no.
Yes.
Yes, because every country have a constitution, especially democracies. You have a collection of norms, laws, conventions that people see as a constitution. Even the United Kingdom, the classic case of not having a constitution, have a constitutions in this sense. In the sense of having a coded constitution that is defended from change by majority at any point of in time, Israel do not have a constitution. Actually, the Israeli legislature, the Knesset, that was elected as the constituent assembly, as an assembly that would adopt a constitution, did not adopt a constitution, but turned into a regular legislator. But the Knesset is actually still our constituent assembly in the sense that it can legislate the constitution. And this worked quite okay for 75 years. The Knesset was adopting what we call basic laws, one after the other. And these, at the end of the days, either when the Messiah will come or just a little before, it was meant to be the Israeli constitution. However, in the last few years, something has changed, and it seems that the Knesset is mixing its very important role as a constituent assembly and its very important but other role as being a legislator, an everyday legislator. It mixed everyday politics in creating Israeli constitution.
So this is so different than what I would imagine. So you're saying that the Knesset not only goes through the day-to-day functional legislation of Israel, the country, like any other country would, but they also wade into what you refer to as basic law, which are equivalent to like constitutional law, the way we think of it here in America.
Yeah, it has to do with a decision that was made in 1950 or 1951 in the Knesset. The Knesset has started with the aiming at the adoption of a constitution, because Israel, when it was established, it was supposed to adopt a constitution according to the resolution of the UN, according to Israel's own aims. It was supposed to adopt a constitution, but there was a lot of many people rejected the idea. First of all, Ben-Gurion, who didn't want to have a constitution standing in his way of building and creating a state with his vision. And second, the ultra-Orthodox forces that saw the Bible and the Jewish religion as the real constitution and didn't want Israel to have any other superior laws. So the decision was a compromise that says Israeli Knesset will adopt a constitution, basic law after basic law, and one day all of these basic laws would become Israeli constitution. Now this happened more than 70 years ago, and I would say that when I look back, it happened. I mean, the basic laws were adopted one after the other. We have more than 10 basic laws that have to do with the main government institutions, with some human rights. The thing is that these basic laws were not seen as the constitution until the 90s, when the Israeli Supreme Court has decided that these are indeed the constitution. It was a type of historical moment like Marbury versus Madison, if you wish, that the court
yeah.
decides that there is a judicial review. So that's what happened in Israel in the 90s. And this what led us probably to today's, let's say, crisis, because
Yeah.
many people did not like this decision.
You mentioned Marbury Madison, which leads me into asking the following question. What is the separation of powers like in Israel? You know, we have this separation of power system of checks and balances in our federal government in the United States. Is it comparable to Israel?
We are very poor when it comes to checks and balances. You see,
Very
the problem
poor.
is like this. First, we have a unitary government. We don't have federal government, so we have one centralized system. Then we have only one house of parliament.
So it means that means no states, right?
No states, no regional government, nothing like this. We have only very weak local government.
Okay.
And we do not have a rigid constitution, and we do not have separation of power between the legislature and the executive branch, because we are a parliamentary regime. So, and once upon a time, people argued that the fact that we have many parties in Israel, not mainly two like United States, but many parties, some people argued that having a lot of parties is our substitute for checks and balances, because each party is checking and balancing the other parties. Together they build the government. There is no government that is based on one party. However, Israeli political parties weakened and became platforms for individual leaders, for individual politicians. So at this point in time, unfortunately, our only check and balances, our only effective check and balance, is the Israeli court. Supreme Court or High Court depends on its exact function.
Which makes the current moment, the current protests, mass protests, which have sort of tampered down a little bit in Israel, very, very important. So let's get into the judicial system. What is the structure of Israel's judicial system? You just said you don't have states, so there's no state courts, I assume.
It is still quite complicated. We have three levels. One is the lower level, and then we have a secondary level, which is the district court, and we have the Supreme Court, which also serves as what we call the High Court of Justice. It serves as the High Court of Justice when people petition against things that the state is doing, against the arbitrary actions of the state. What is interesting about the High Court of Justice, that not only Israeli citizens can petition to it, but also Palestinians who live in the occupied territories.
Who are not citizens. Oh, that's interesting.
Who are not citizens, yeah.
Huh. Okay. Do Israeli judges have life tenure?
No, not at all. They have to leave when they are 70 years old.
Okay. But let's say if they're appointed, let's say at the age of 40, they can stay till 70. They don't have term limits.
Sure. What is really at stake these days in Israel is the debate about the way that the judges are nominated. Now, when I thought about the way the judges are nominated in Israel, to students from all over the world, I spent about close to a decade teaching about it. I said that this is the best way that one could imagine.
Best way. Oh, well then, tell me, please.
And I'm an expert on selection of candidates within parties, and I thought this is the best way. The nomination is made by a committee of 9. Five of them are
Committee
professional.
of 9 within the Knesset.
No,
No,
nine people.
okay.
Five of them are out of external, 3 are Supreme Court judges, and 2 are representative of the bar. And additional 4 are politicians, 2 government ministers, one of them is the Minister of Justice, and 2 are from the legislature, supposedly one from the opposition and one from the coalition. So you have a mix of people from with different interests and with different point of views. And about a decade ago, a little more, another rule was added, which made it even better, in my opinion.
How so?
Any selection should be approved by 7 out of 9 in the committee.
Oh,
This
like a
means
supermajority. Okay.
Yeah, this means that the judges or any other force within this committee cannot nominate anyone themselves. They need to create consensus. They need to negotiate on this, and this creates a balance between the professionals and the politicians. From my point of view, and I think this is not only my point of view, if anyone want to open Aristotle and Polybius, the mixing of different forces within the same committee, within the same government institution, is supposed to create an optimal balance. It is not prone to specific pathologies of either politicians, professionals, or whatever, but it balances all the time these different forces.
So this system, first of all, it does sound better because it brings more diversity of forces that need to sort of converge into a decision. It's much different than what we have here. Here, the president appoints. I mean, he consults with different interest groups, professionals and politicians, but he or she is the one that does this. Is it similar to the United States where the Senate has to approve the judicial nominee or not? Does the Knesset have to approve?
No, the committee is doing all of this. I mean, there is a preliminary work. Somebody has to screen all of the people who dream to be Supreme Court judges. But at the end of the day, the last decision is made by this committee. And this what made the government attack this committee, because their argument is that that the judges that this committee is nominating are too independent, and they do not let the government have its way. So, and the government, the argument is that the judges are much more liberal than the right-wing governments that we have at most times in Israel. And this would be convincing unless you remember that a few of the most important judges, Supreme Court judges in Israel, came from the Israeli right, like Meir Shamgar, who was the president of the court and was in the Etzel, before the state was established. He was part of the Etzel, which was the right-wing militia. And then we have Esther Naor, which is really the flesh and blood of the Herut party. I mean, it is the case that the court is defending individuals and minority, but that's what courts are for, isn't it?
No, I agree with that. Just one comment and then just a follow-up question to confirm something. One is that when they say that the government or politicians don't have enough hand in selecting judges, you just told me in the committee there are several politicians. It's not just professionals, right? So that's sort of that's an answer to that moots that. The second point, and I think you already talked about this, Dr. Rahat, Israel's Supreme Court seems to be similar to the United States Supreme Court in that it is powerful. It can block actions and by the executive branch and legislation by the Knesset. By block, I mean once they're brought to its review. Correct?
It is quite powerful, but it doesn't use its power so often. And also, while it is powerful, part of its being powerful is because the Israeli Knesset has not finished its job in writing a constitution. So the court has to decide. So they have so much space for maneuver because they do not have a full constitution in their hands to guide them. So they have to make decisions that sometimes, the lacuna is so huge, so they have a lot of space to maneuver. Now, when the politicians are claiming that the court is too powerful, it's in their own hands to define the borders of the decisions of the court. But no, they prefer to blame the court, to play a blame game instead of, writing a constitution and tell to the court, this is the constitution, work with it.
Yeah, yeah. They don't want to be blamed for it.
That I think they were addicted to it. That's the problem.
Addicted to it. I love it. Yeah. Dr. Khaled, you mentioned individual politics, individual politicians. So we'll be right back after a short break to talk about personalization of Israel's politics.